Welcome to the Republican Professor. It's Friday, 27 September 2024. I'm coming at you from the once great state of California. We're getting back into Helmut Thielicke politics. Page 35. We're going to just start where we left off back in, gosh, it was April. Idolatry as a means of rule. You might be thinking, I don't know who Helmut Thielicke is. Well, I covered it. So, go back to the previous episodes. He lived under Nazism and communism, and he taught for a long time at the University of Hamburg. And he's with us today through his writing in Theological Ethics, Volume 2, Politics, brought to us by Fortress Press. Go to fortresspress.com to see their selection. My copy was purchased at Old Capitol Books in Monterey, California, right on Alvarado Street. And it's across from Nick the Greek restaurant, if that's still there. Hopefully it is. I haven't been there in a few months. So I don't know if it's still there. I'm hoping it's still there. It's a great chain. Ideology as a means of rule, page 35. Ideology as a means of rule. Get a copy. Buy a copy of this. You will not regret it. We're going to make a fair use of this material. There's going to be a transformative, performative reading here and commentary. Strap in. If ideology is thus defined, is to be accessible to the grasp of understanding, it cannot be left in this half-light. Its true center and driving force must be known. Remember, he had opportunity to think deeply about the threats of National Socialism and communist socialism, both of which destroyed his country. They're both on the left. See what is right, what is left. See the episode on that. They're both socialist. Socialism is not a right-wing thing. It's a left-wing thing. So when you zoom in, let's just pretend that there is a I don't know, a scale. There's wings, okay? And communism, let's say, is on the left. We're just going to stipulate that because it's socialist. The socialist principle would put National Socialism also on the left. Now, whether National Socialism is over here or over here, we could debate. And maybe you zoom in and maybe you zoom in so far and then you're just in this one little area and you think, oh yeah, that's left and that's right. But actually you zoom out, they're both really close together over here. Well, that's what Helmut Thielicke is saying. They're both totalitarian, man. They're both on the left. And that's why I like what Cleon Skousen said, which is that anarchy is on the right and totalitarian police state is on the left. Well, then the fascists and the communists are two sides of the same coin. And you think, well, how could they fight in World War II? Well, some of the most bitter fighting is between people, ethnic groups, you might want to say. And by ethnic group, I just mean groups of people, because that's what ethnos means in Greek. It just means people that are formed, have some kind of bond of connection, whether by custom or kinship or belief. Think about Athens and Sparta, both Greeks. Man, they fought bitterly. Think about the United States, North and the South, both Americans. They fought bitterly for who was right and who was wrong. Think about Catholics and Protestants in Europe, in England. Think about the American Indians.
They're Native Americans.
Well, I'm a Native American. I was born here. I'm not Indian. By the way, it's the Bureau of Indian Affairs in the Department of Interior. FYI. There's 2,000 federally registered tribes of American Indians. And of the various maps that I've seen of their territory, I haven't seen any that come close to 2,000. Not even close. There might be 30 tribes on the map, but there, in fact, were way, way more than 30 tribes. There's like at least 2,000 because there's some tribes that have state recognition but not federal. And there's some tribes that have neither because they ceased to exist. And they fought bitterly. Now, if you see these maps of the American Indian and you see the Blackfeet coming down, so you think that they just were allowed to just walk down there? No, they fought bitterly. Each tribe had warriors, and for a reason. They were at war. This is what I ask my students. Why do you think they had warriors? Because they were at war constantly, or at least the threat of war. And many tribes died out. For example, the Coahuilticans in Texas, Karankawas in Texas. The Karankawas still exist. The only reason we know anything about them is because of Spanish explorers and missionaries in the 1500s who wrote diaries. Are you guys with me on this? The communists and the fascists are two sides of the same coin. Yeah, they fought bitterly. That's because they're so alike. They're fighting bitterly for the true nature of socialism. And you may have been intellectually molested since you were 5 years old by Democrats. And so you can't tell because the Democrats are foisting at taxpayer expense their biases and prejudices for socialism on you. And so, they label communists typically label anything they don't like as fascist. But the truth is, in history, they were socialists, the fascists. Helmut Thielicke lived through it. And he's saying what I'm saying. They're both totalitarian. He doesn't use left wing and right wing terminology. Thank God. Because I don't, it's not really that helpful. Back to Thielicke. As we shall discover, well, hold up. Hold up. Its true center and driving force must be known. As we shall discover, this lies in its pragmatic tendency. Ends are invented. This may be seen above all in the fact that wherever an ideology enters normative spheres like science, law, and ethics, it robs the norms of their authoritative position and turns them into mere means for attaining certain ends and serving certain interests. The pragmatic purpose of ideologies is beyond question. I'm on page 36 now. How's my tie looking? Good? Sorry, I just rolled out of bed like I usually get dressed. I sleep in this. Usually I get dressed up in jammies, but I didn't have time today. I rolled out of bed like this. I know I'm embarrassed. Our concern then is not so much to assert this fact as to inquire concerning the degree to which this pragmatic tendency works in opposition to such non-material norms as the true, the righteous, or the good, actually swallowing them up. So far as pragmatism is concerned itself, we may simply note the statement of Marx that, quote, theory itself becomes a material force when it has seized the masses, unquote. Stalin takes this to mean that Marx is referring to the tremendous organizing, mobilizing, and transforming role of such political theories. And I want to make a reference here in the footnotes. He's reading Stalin himself. And he's reading Marx. That's Karl Marx's contribution to the critique of Hegel's philosophy of right. Joseph Stalin's dialectical and historical materialism. In other words, what I'm trying to say is this dude is a scholar at Hamburg. He's reading in German. He's reading in maybe in English and Russian. I don't know. But he's at least reading in German. And I know he spoke English. He probably could read it pretty well. I don't know if he spoke German or Russian, but he's reading original sources. And so he's not just making this up here. To this degree, ideologies are, quote, the tools of life, unquote. Quote, a social idea is considered right, not because it corresponds to objective reality, but because it is a good tool for the class which has brought it forth, unquote. That's worth reading again. I'm going to read it again. Quote, a social idea is considered right, not because it corresponds to objective reality, but because it is a good tool for the class which has brought it forth, unquote. That's footnote 7. And that is some guy named Baczynski, and I think that that's a communist theorist. Yeah, J.M. Baczynski, Soviet-Russian Dialectical Materialism. Hence, ideologies are subject not to the truth, but to the end which they serve. They are variable not merely in the sense that they change in accordance with the material substructure on which they depend, but also in the sense that they change with the changing ends. As means of actualization, ideologies are controlled by men, whereas truth controls men. The consequence is that the statements made in ideologies are not shaped by the truth, even if they resemble truth. The form of their statements is wholly an expression of the will to power in Nietzsche's sense. By appearing to pronounce truths, while in fact proclaiming a program, they supply an intellectual alibi for the exercise of a collective will to power. The norm of the good is similarly swallowed up by the ends sought. In this connection, one may draw upon illustrations from quite different sources, such as the sayings, quote, God is whatever serves my country, unquote, or, quote, my country, right or wrong, unquote. Or one may think of the demand of Machiavelli in that in practical politics, the good not be made the ideal, but that the ethical phrases be used only in order to establish the moral credit, which will be useful in achieving political ends. George Sorel laid his finger on a real truth when he described social ideologies of this sort as myths, which are not descriptions of things, but an expression of the resolution to act. Hitler says exactly the same thing. Even the best idea becomes a danger as soon as it pretends to be an end itself, but in reality only represents a means to an end. Precisely because Rosenberg's The Myth of the 20th Century is so banal, and because his thinking, as distinct from Marxism-Leninism, does not press on to the point where an attempt is made to harmonize truth and end, its trivial simplification brings out the more clearly the true nature of these tendencies. For Rosenberg, the myth in question is, in the first place, the ideological reflection of a racial biological substance. The substructure, superstructure schema applies exactly. In the second place, this myth is simply a tool for exercising non-material power, a tool for which the question of truth is wholly irrelevant. What's that saying? Power matters, not truth. Power. Does that remind you of anything? These are the kinds of people that censor their opponents. Truth doesn't matter. Power does. These are the kind of people that give rules with the appearance of legitimacy, but they're arbitrary and capricious because they're not based in truth. Witness the CDC mask mandate, which we've unmasked here on the podcast in the last month. It was an illegal rule from the very beginning. Much of gun control is the same way. It's based in sloganeering. I'm not saying that the average anti-gun control guy has great arguments back. I'm working on helping them. For example, a lot of people on my side, on the correct side, say that gun control doesn't work. Well, that's not a very good response to gun control. The true reason we're against gun control is because it does work. And sometimes I just want to smack my side for ignoring the obvious. When you criminalize innocent conduct, it tends to discourage innocent conduct. That's true. But it's unjust. That's the reason we oppose it. It's always wrong to criminalize innocent conduct. Always. The innocent are not criminal. And if your policy can't tell the difference between innocent and criminal, you have a crappy policy, dude. You have a crappy way of producing policy. And by the way, the primary thing that Democrats, fascists, and communists have in common, and I think it's a left-wing thing that they have in common, is they criminalize innocent conduct.
How so? How so? Didn't the parties switch?
Didn't the parties switch? Wow. If someone ever says that to you, listen carefully while you ask them to define this so-called theory that they have of the party switching. Quite often they can't describe the theory very well, very clearly, and then ask for the evidence of the theory. What is the theory supposed to explain? In the back of your mind, you should think, is this theory performing a function that has nothing to do with evidence or truth? Maybe the theory is just trying to help them feel better about the crappy history of the Democratic Party. That might be the primary function of the theory. It's a psychological thing. It has nothing to do with epistemology. It's not an epistemic function. It's a psychological function. And I think that is exactly what the theory is designed to do. But running away from slavery, that's innocent conduct, according to Republicans, and Republicans have never changed their mind on that. So there's no switching. Rather, it's Republicans holding the line, and finally Democrats come alongside only after great suffering for decades and lots of blood loss and lots of fighting. And I mean fighting with guns. That's what I mean. And giving black people guns. That's how it actually happened. And it took a long time and it was very frustrating. And the Democrats were like pit bulls. They just held on tight for decades and decades and decades. That's how it actually happened. The more Republican the South got, the safer it is for blacks. And that's not an accidental correlation. Nobody switched on the Republican side. It was just Republicans trying to hold the line while Democrat terrorists just fastened their jaw down like a pit bull for decades. That's actually what happened. The reason people can't articulate it that way is because they've been intellectually molested by Democrats since they were 5 at taxpayer expense in these institutions that are called schools. But I'm reading this to you, and he's saying these totalitarians, they don't care about truth. They care about power. So what Democrats, fascists, communists, they all have in common. Democrats, socialists, national socialists, communist socialists, what do they all have in common? Criminalization of innocent conduct. It's always been truly natural law, under the natural law, lawful conduct to run away from slavery. Well, that the Democrats were against that in the positive law. Witness the Trigg versus Pennsylvania in 1842. Witness the Fugitive Slave Act before the Civil War. Well, of course it's before the Civil War because Republicans won and crushed slavery back to the Stone Age. Witness people trying to escape from the fascist concentration camps, which were really slave labor camps. It was slavery, just like the Democrats had. It was slavery. Witness people in the Soviet Union trying to escape the Iron Curtain, being sent to slave labor camps in Siberia. One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich. Just read it. Just read the damn thing. For speaking their mind, that's innocent conduct. For wanting to defend themselves with arms, that's innocent conduct. Is this the first time you've ever heard this? Dig into your pockets and support the Republican professor financially. Stop assuming that we're not all under tremendous pressure. If you have extra finances, send it in, for God's sake. What are you waiting for? Now's the time. You think it's easy to do this? All right, guys. Let's keep going. Getting heated here. In the norm, I'm on page 36. We're going to do a little bit more. We're going to get to science and ideology. That's the next section. Oh my gosh, that's a good one. You think that that's not relevant to what's going on? The norm of the good is similarly swallowed up by the ends sought. In this connection, one may draw upon illustrations from quite different sources, such as the sayings, quote, God is whatever serves my country. Okay, we already read that. Dang it. George Sorel laid his finger on real truth when he described social ideologies as the sort of this sort. Where the hell are we? Sorry. I didn't mark my place. I apologize. I got too busy preaching. Let me find my place real quick. This next part is really good. Um, where I left off was In the second place, this myth is simply a tool for exercising non-material power, a tool for which the question of truth is wholly irrelevant. That's where I left off. Here's the next sentence on page 37. For if it relies only on terror, it creates opposition for itself, if not in the form of a movement, then at least in the form of an inner immigration that may or may not be outwardly apparent. That's very insightful. Yeah, why don't they just rely purely on terror? Why do they need ideology? Why don't you just have guns and just leave the ideology to the side? He's saying that would be that would create an opposition to them. And people get taken in by this ideology and the appearance of truth. And so it makes them less resistant, less able to organize effectively against it. That's very insightful. Very insightful. Yeah. The totalitarian state has need of such an ideological instrument. For if it relies only on terror, it creates opposition for itself, if not in the form of a movement, then at least in the form of an inner immigration that may or may not be outwardly apparent. Inner resistance cannot be controlled by terror. It can be overcome only as the inner antagonism, which is inaccessible to force, is conquered, either by persuasion or by the power of suggestion, propaganda. This can be accomplished only by non-material means, by intellectual and spiritual weapons called ideologies or political myths. Religions can be used for the same purpose and have been, even Christianity. That was what yesterday's episode was about. And where there is no living religion available by which to control the masses, a substitute can be fabricated. Rosenberg's myth is just one such synthetic product of the laboratory. The common feature of all such attempts is that they claim the whole man and that they endeavor to actualize the claim by means of ideologies. Over and above the surgery of terror, these ideologies supply an internal and psychological therapy which brings man's inner being into subjection, either convincing him through arguments or stirring him to enthusiasm and fanaticism through emotional appeals. And here we go to the claim of absoluteness, which we'll cover next time. We've done enough for today. Thank you for joining me on the Republican Professor podcast.